It's another clear indication that the religious are out of their minds, but that's pretty much par for the course, isn't it? They don't understand what it will take to convince actual atheists that their imaginary friends are real. I'm sure they'd have a lot of excuses for why they fail. I mean, we see that all the time. But fail they do, and this is going to be no exception. There's something really wrong with these people. So let's watch the inevitable slide down into insanity coming up next. We're back with God today, or at least someone who is completely whacked out of their gourd, who calls themselves God. And that's not exactly a surprise around here, is it? But this God character seems to think they can easily, in all caps, prove God to an atheist. And this is part 3, and so far, no go. This is just proof that the religious are delusional, as if we didn't understand that before, but hey, I'm willing to give it another go. How about you? So back to the grind. Please prove God is real in a way that a rational atheist can accept. And I wouldn't be holding my breath if I were you, but let's go see.
But it gets even more powerful than this. The next way to show that God exists is by looking at the historical evidence of Jesus' resurrection.
And there is none. That was easy. Oh, I know he'll come back with the standard religious claims, but none of that stands up to any kind of rational scrutiny, as I'll show when it arrives. My book says a thing doesn't matter. People believe what my book says doesn't matter. You have to have actual evidence independent of your blind faith, and you don't have any. How about actual Roman records for any of it? Do you have that? No. No, you don't. How about non-Christian demonstrable eyewitnesses to any of it? Do you have that? Nope. You've got none of that either. Let's see some physical remains of anything. Got any? Well, of course you don't. When we say evidence, we mean something like that, and you simply don't have any. That's why you're making all the excuses that you are. We don't want things that you have to interpret as favorable to your faith. We want things that anyone can examine without having to take your faith seriously at all. Come back when you've got something like that, because until then, we are not remotely going to be impressed.
It's interesting how some people talk negatively about early Christianity, saying it was chaotic and that a group made up stories about Jesus becoming God, writing them in the Bible and calling anyone who disagreed a heretic.
You mean like they do today? I think it's funny watching the religious trying to spin it that way, like it was a vast conspiracy to deceive people, when I don't see an awful lot of atheists saying that at all. I'm sure the early Christians absolutely believed what they said, but that doesn't make it true, and it's the truth that matters. That's why we need the actual evidence to begin with, so we don't have to rely on unsupported claims and bald assertions that can't be independently backed up. We are trying to verify the story, and you're just trying to take the story at face value. Never are the two sides going to agree. If we can't validate the story independently of the story itself or the beliefs about it, then we are going to reject it, just like we reject the stories of Elvis still being alive after his death. Either you have evidence for the actual validity of your tales, or you don't. And sadly, you don't. Just deal with it and move on. You can't convince us without it.
Now, even if these claims were true or the Bible got messed up, there are still historical facts agreed upon by most historians and scholars that prove God's existence, and here they are.
But they're not. Because as I keep saying, consensus means nothing without the evidence to back it up. This is never going to go away. I don't care what any individual or group of individuals say. I care what they can present to prove that their conclusions are factually correct. And this goes for everyone. I don't have double standards. One standard is all we need. I am absolutely consistent. Evolution isn't true because a bunch of scientists say it is. It's true because that's what the evidence clearly shows. Every scientist on the planet could have a sudden heart attack and drop dead, and the evidence would still show what's going on. No consensus required. I don't need the people. I just need the facts. And maybe it might help if you had some.
The first fact is that a Jewish rabbi named Jesus of Nazareth was killed by crucifixion by Romans in the 1st century.
You have no evidence for that. That's the claim. That's not the proof of the claim. Where is your evidence to back it up? Now, I agree, it is a pretty mundane claim, but mundane doesn't mean true. It's also a mundane claim that I had pizza for lunch yesterday, but it's also false because I didn't have pizza for lunch. If you care about the truth, then you'd want to verify that with something more than a bald assertion. I don't take assertions as fact. I might not care what you ate yesterday, and I might say, sure, whatever, it's completely irrelevant anyhow, and just move on, but I'm not going to do that with the Jesus claim. Frankly, I think anybody willing to do that is a complete idiot, and that goes for secular scholars as well. There's a huge claim upon which everything else that comes after it is based, so we need to establish that with more than, sure, why not? Now, note that I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I also don't have evidence to back that up. At best, all I can say is, I don't know, and that's true of your side as well. You can't say, well, yes it did, unless you can prove it. The best you can do, the best that anyone can do, is say, who the hell knows? And that kind of does it for the Jesus story, doesn't it? Or at least it should, if people were being remotely rational, which, let's be honest, a lot of people really aren't.
Secondly, after Jesus died, his followers believed they saw him alive again.
You have absolutely no evidence for that since the Gospels were written anonymously. You can't prove that he even had believers because they left no independently verifiable evidence behind. Again, the best anybody with a brain can do is say, I don't know. Besides, who cares what they believed? I care what actually happened, and you have no way to establish that independently. So we're right back at square one, where it's just fifis and faith, and both of those are completely irrelevant. You have to establish that Jesus existed first, and yes, I know that's what he's trying to do, but without a real Jesus, a demonstrable Jesus, something you can verify with evidence, how do you even begin to establish that he had any followers? I mean, without independent evidence that these people were real and not just characters in a book of mythology that eventually got written by non-eyewitnesses to anything at all. I'm trying to get to the actual demonstrable baseline for any of this, and you just don't have one. And that's kind of a problem, right?
The third fact is that their lives changed a lot because of this belief, even to the point of being willing to die for it.
Again, no evidence for that. Most of that is just church tradition. We have the writings of early church fathers who had a vested interest in telling these stories because that's how they made their money. That's how they made their living. They didn't want to go out and get real jobs. But that doesn't make any of these stories true. This is where we're always going to have a problem because these are big claims being made with absolutely nothing of any substance to back any of them up. I reject all of the claims so far as simply being stories. You can't validate them in any demonstrable way. The best we can say for any of it is, we just don't know. But that's not a lot to base a religion on, is it? They have to pretend that these things are established historical facts, because without it, their beliefs go absolutely nowhere. And I think that's really what's going on here, largely is secular historians realizing that they have to give in somehow, or the religious, the ones with all the power and the control in their discipline, they just won't talk to them anymore, and they lose all credibility and probably the ability to get paid any significant amount of money. That doesn't make any of it true, though, and it's the truth that matters. I don't get why more people don't understand that.
Both James and Paul, who were against Jesus' message, started believing in his resurrection after claiming that Jesus spoke to them after his death.
That's the story anyhow. Paul, whoever he was, since we don't have any evidence of him prior to his roadside conversion, certainly seems to have believed it, but believing it doesn't make it true. We don't have any independent evidence for James, the brother of Jesus, outside of stuff that the writer of the Pauline epistles wrote down. Again, doesn't make it true, does it? We also have some elements in Josephus, but he was unlikely to have ever known the real person, so that's questionable at best. Writing stories about things you were told without being able to back them up on your own, that's kind of doubtful right there. I care only about the truth, and I have absolutely no vested interest in adopting the religion because it makes me feel good.
Lastly, Jesus was buried in a tomb in Jerusalem, and the tomb was found empty shortly after his death.
You have no evidence for that. All of these build one upon the other, and since you can't show that Jesus was ever real to begin with, everything else collapses until you can do that. It doesn't matter what you can get people to agree with for the sake of argument. It matters if you have any actual evidence. The religious must have these things being true, or their entire religion collapses. They must claim that they are true, or everything else they believe falls apart. And I don't give a damn about that. I care if they're actually true, and the only thing we can rely on for their truthfulness is the actual evidence that we have, which in this case doesn't exist. Again, that takes us back to I don't know, and I don't know isn't a good place to start a religious movement, is it? That's why I don't believe any of it.
These are strong facts, but that's not all.
Because they're not facts, not one bit. They are assertions based on faith and the sadly weak thinking of a lot of secular scholars who have to rely on the good graces of the religious to have a job. If you're impressed by any of this, I really don't know what to tell you. However, he said that's not all, so let's see where he's going to go with this. This is exactly why we're not impressed with anything that the religious have to say. It's far too much faith and not remotely enough facts, and I don't accept anything without the facts. And it's really too bad they don't care.
More than 75% of historians agree on all 5 facts, and over 95% agree on the first 4.
Which doesn't make any of it true, because none of these are actual demonstrable facts. Facts require evidential support, and you have none. I don't care about consensus at all. This is why the religious are getting absolutely nowhere, because they have nothing. Even if everything he said so far, even if every single one of Gary Habermas's minimal facts were actually demonstrable, and they're not, that doesn't mean anything. It's why his number of supposed facts keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller as time goes on. That doesn't get you to anything remotely resembling a god. And that's really the thing. Even if you could establish Jesus as a historical fact, which they can't do, that doesn't mean that your religion is worthwhile or true. Even if you could prove that Jesus, whoever this Jesus was, because we don't have any facts whatsoever supporting an actual earthly existence, but even if this Jesus did come back from the grave in some verifiable way, that doesn't mean God done it. You're still stuck taking all of this bullshit on faith, and I don't do faith. Not one bit.
What's interesting is that no other idea except God exists and raised Jesus from the death explains all these historical facts.
Sure it does. Even if we grant that those are, in fact, facts, which we know they're not, But who says it's your God? Maybe Jesus was a mutant and just came back like an X-Men. There are tons of other explanations that are possible, but you don't happen to like them, and that's hardly my problem, is it? This is why I tell the religious that they have to walk us through all the steps that they have that got them to their beliefs, and they never ever can. Because they didn't go through any of these steps to get to their beliefs. They just said, God done it, used faith, and that was the end of it. But you can't just say, God done it. You have to show how you got there in the first place. Intelligently, no faith required. Prove God, because God can't just be an assertion. He has to be an established fact with evidence to back him up. Good luck proving that one. It's why I keep saying that you have to demonstrate your own direct causal links. A real God did a real thing that you can show actually happened in the real world, and you can prove that these two things, the real God and the real thing, are actually demonstrably connected, such that one demonstrably did the other. This is not some small claim that people ought to just shrug and say, why the hell not? This is one of the biggest claims that could ever be made, and therefore it must meet the highest evidentiary standards, and you people aren't even trying. The burden of proof is completely on you, and you have all of your work ahead of you. Better get to it if you expect to convince anybody with a brain.
The theories that say the disciples lied, that Jesus didn't really die, that they were all hallucinating, or that records were corrupted, don't fit with these facts.
Except you have no facts. That's the problem. You can't prove that there was a historical Jesus. You can't prove that there were any disciples. You can't prove that any of those stories actually happened as written by the anonymous authors. You just really want to believe. But wanting to believe, that isn't good enough. This is why consensus means nothing. I don't care what you can get a group of people to agree to, especially when that agreement is relatively ill-defined. Are they agreeing for the sake of argument? Are they agreeing because they don't care? Are they agreeing because if they don't, then the majority of scholars won't talk to them anymore and will try to trash them at every turn? Are they agreeing because they want to keep their jobs? Agreeing under any of those circumstances means absolutely nothing. The only agreement that might matter is if they agree that the event actually happened and they have evidence to back it up. That is not the case for any secular scholar that I am aware of or have ever spoken to. If you know otherwise and can back it up, please let me know down in the comments because I'd be really curious to see it.
In short, when we look at what everyone agrees on from history, it leads us to the conclusion that not only does God exist, but also that Christianity is true.
Yet nobody agrees with that outside of the faith. This is sprinting around with the goalposts. First, none of those things are agreed upon by everyone as he claimed. That's just bullshit. Secondly, I have serious questions about the validity of secular scholars who are saying that any of it did happen. Prove it. Why not? Or it's a mundane claim, or well, I'll have to sacrifice my intellectual integrity to get the religious to talk to me. Those are not legitimate answers. If you are going to make a positive statement, then you have the burden of proof to back it up, and that goes for everyone, religious and non-religious alike. It's why I think there are so many word games going on here, and I don't respect word games. If you don't know a thing is true, say you don't know. If you have to lie to get your voice heard, then you need to grow a spine and stand up for yourself. Knowledge doesn't exist without evidence. If you have none, stop making a fool of yourself and stop playing make-believe.
Another important thing to consider is our conscience, a gift given to humans. The Bible in Romans chapter 2 verse 15 mentions,
I don't care about your stupid book until you have evidence that any of it is true. In fact, that all of it is true, because one thing being true doesn't have any impact on another thing being true. You need evidence for both. So we'll be fast forwarding through the verse because it's entirely irrelevant. In fact, Everything in this video has been entirely irrelevant. It's just a series of empty claims, not independently defensible, and certainly with no external evidence to back any of it up. He assumed that your conscience was a gift, presumably by his imaginary friend, which is why he pulled out the Bible to begin with. But this is a video about easily proving God to atheists. And let's be honest, no atheist with a brain in their head is going to take any of this seriously at all, are they? If you do, let me know down in the comments because, yeah, I think you've got some problems too.
Humans are unique from animals and plants in various ways, and one significant aspect is that human conscience.
Not really, no. Animals have consciences too. You just have to watch them interact, particularly in more social species, to see it clearly. Of course, the religious want to feel like they're special. They're not, excepting the short bus special, but they've got an emotional attachment to the idea, and they really want to feel like they're better than everybody else because they just want to be happy. It's an ego problem, not an intellect problem. But your ego doesn't mean anything. It's just an indication that you need to grow the hell up.
We don't just know that we exist, we also understand what is right and wrong.
All of that is simply untrue. First off, we don't know that we exist. We believe it, we have at least some evidence to support it, but we have no actual knowledge. Knowledge requires evidence, and a lot more than we actually have. However, it's the second part that is laughable nonsense. If we just knew what was right and wrong, then nobody would be in prison, would they? This is one more lie that the religious tell themselves because they really wish it was true. But the second that they look at the real world and find out that reality doesn't match up to their emotionally held beliefs, they just have to invent all kinds of fantasy stories and excuses for why it doesn't look like we magically know right from wrong. Is stealing wrong? Then why are there more than 200,000 vehicle thefts just in the state of California alone in 2022? In fact, from 2019 to 2022, vehicle thefts increased nationwide by about 25%. Explain that one for us if you would. Don't go to Pueblo, Colorado, which has the single highest vehicle theft rate in the country at more than 1,000 thefts per 100,000 residents. But sure, tell us how morality is written on our hearts without having to attach a whole bunch of empty excuses for why it sure the hell doesn't look that way. Stop making fools of yourselves. It's really not a good look.
Based on this understanding, we've created a whole system of justice, rewards, and punishment.
None of which would be necessary if everyone had the same understanding of right and wrong. In 2022 alone, there were almost 7.5 million arrests in the United States, and that's down from, say, 1990 levels at 14.1 million. That's a whole lot of people doing stuff wrong, isn't it? How does that work exactly when everybody has the exact same morality written on their hearts? Again, keep your undemonstrated excuses to yourself and just answer the question. And I bet you won't be able to, and nobody will be surprised.
Now let's talk about Jesus himself.
Yeah, let's not. Again, we're skipping over the Bible verses because they just don't matter. This is the same kind of thing that the religious pull all the time. They assume that everybody's just like they are, that everybody cares about their silly book of mythology, and that everyone believes all the things that they do. It's why we know that these "here's how to convert an atheist" videos aren't actually being made for atheists, because we don't take any of these ridiculous preconceptions seriously. Now, we'll get to Jesus in a second, but the last thing you actually want to be doing with an atheist is just assuming that they're just like you are, because they're not. But they don't want to talk to those people, do they? They don't want to talk to any of us. They just want to lie to each other so the money keeps rolling in. Big surprise there.
It could have been easy for God to stay distant from his creation, but he chose to come to earth as a human being.
That's your claim. Let us know when you can actually back it up with more than your flapping lips. How do you actually think that any of this is going to convince an atheist of anything? I can't tell you how many theists I've asked that, and they never have a coherent answer, because they don't actually care about atheists. They want people who are desperately looking for their imaginary friend. They assume that's everyone, but they're wrong. I don't want God. I also don't not want God. I only care about what's actually true in reality. If your God is actually real and you can prove it, that's one thing. But they can never do that, can they? If you want me to believe your God is real, you have to convince me with evidence. Not arguments, not claims, not faith, evidence. And they're not even trying because they don't care about evidence themselves. They just really want to believe.
Jesus. This isn't just something mentioned in the Bible. Even secular historians like Josephus confirm the historical fact of Jesus' existence.
Josephus did absolutely nothing of the sort. That was an early Christian attempt at forgery. Anyone who did even the slightest amount of research on their own, they'd know that. Of course, these people don't try to research their beliefs because they don't care. It just sounds good to them, and they get a dopamine shot in the brain, so it's just gotta be true. This is why these things are so damn stupid. They're ignorant and proud of it. If they weren't proud, they wouldn't keep making these stupid videos all the time. They wouldn't keep proving what fools they are. And I wouldn't have a 1,300 video backlog. It's really kind of sad.
Jesus not only claimed that God exists, but also that he, himself, is God in human form.
And it doesn't matter what anyone claims. It only matters what can be justified with evidential support. David Koresh claimed to be the return of Jesus. Do you believe that? Tons of people have claimed over the years to be gods in human form. The Egyptian pharaohs did that. Naram Sin of Akkad did that. A lot of the Japanese emperors did that, or at least that they were the divine descendants of the goddess Amaterasu. The Dalai Lamas are supposed to be reincarnations of a god in Tibetan Buddhism. The list goes on and on and on and on. Do you accept that any of that is true? Or are you just cherry picking because you have an emotional attachment to your own particular man god? That just proves that you are irrational. But this whole video does that anyway, doesn't it? Anyhow, this is where we're going to stop for the week, and hopefully we're going to knock through the rest of it next week. This is a very, very long video, which is going to make the Supercut fans happy, as I'm figuring this is going to come out at just about 2 hours. But what do you think for this part of it? Personally, I am not remotely impressed, and this is supposed to easily prove God is real. It's only proven just how stupid the religious actually are, and that's not exactly a surprise. This is why more people are deconverting than are converting, because we're too smart to fall for any of this bullshit. They have nothing at all intelligent to say. And that's kind of sad, isn't it?